If you ever find yourself on a date, and your date asks you if you want to play a game, Bloody Mary, to be exact, a little word of advice: don't do it. It is not a good idea, as you'll find out for yourself in today's story. I hope you enjoy it. I certainly did. You know that jittery feeling you get right before a first date? The kind that's a mix of excitement and the sort of nerves that make you question why you agreed to the date in the first place. That's exactly how I felt walking up to Elise's apartment. We had matched on Tinder, and right from the start, she stood out from the rest. Her profile was a collage of her with a big, infectious smile, goofy poses in front of haunted houses, and one with her holding a sign that said, "Ghost Hunter by Night." I chuckled at that one. I didn't believe in that stuff, but her vibe was a breath of fresh air compared to the endless profiles of duck-faced selfies and cliché quotes. We hit it off instantly. Our text conversations were a rapid back and forth about everything from our favorite horror movies, her idea, not mine, to the best taco joints within a 10-mile radius. She was funny, a little odd, and easy to talk to. When she suggested we skip the traditional dinner date and cook together at her place, I was all in. Standing in front of her door, I straightened my shirt and took a deep breath before knocking. The sound of footsteps approaching from the inside, and then the door swung open. There she was, even more stunning in person, wearing a black apron with the words, "Boo, I'm a ghost," scribbled across the front. It made me laugh. "Hey, you found it," Elise beamed, ushering me inside. Her place was cozy, filled with vintage furniture and lots of books. It smelled like garlic and oregano. My stomach rumbled in approval. We got to work in the kitchen, chopping, frying, and occasionally stealing bites when we thought the other wasn't looking. Dinner was a lively affair. She told me about her day job at a local bookstore and her night job, which was more of a hobby: ghost hunting. I teased her about it. "Come on, you don't actually believe in ghosts, do you?" She winked. "I don't know. Maybe. It's more about the thrill, the adventure. Don't tell me you've never been curious." I shrugged, playing it cool. I guess I just need proof. After we had devoured the meal, and the wine was flowing, Elise suggested we play a game. I expected Monopoly or maybe some kind of card game, but she had another idea. She leaned in, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Ever play Bloody Mary?" I laughed. "What, the kids' game? Stand in front of the mirror and chant a name? Come on, that's kid stuff." She nudged me playfully. "Scared?" "Of what? My own reflection?" Elise persisted. "It's tradition. My tradition on first dates. Consider it a rite of passage." Something about the way she said it with such earnest made me pause. It was silly, but looking into those expectant eyes of hers, I didn't have the heart to say no. Plus, there was something tantalizing about doing something so childishly taboo. "All right then, let's summon your ghost," I said with mock seriousness. We cleaned up the dishes and Elise led me to the bathroom, its lights dimmed to a dusky twilight by the small candles she placed around the sink. She stood beside me in the front of the large mirror, our reflections looking back at us. "Okay, here's how it works," she instructed. "We turn off the lights, stand in front of the mirror and say Bloody Mary 3 times. Then, we wait." "And then?" I asked, playing along. "And then, if Mary's in a good mood, she'll appear and say hello." I smirked. There was an odd tingle at the back of my neck. And if she's not? Elise met my gaze in the mirror. Then, let's hope she's not thirsty. Her joke sent a chill down my spine, but I brushed it off. It was just a game after all. With a dramatic flair, Elise reached for the light switch and the bathroom plunged into darkness. The candlelight flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. She grabbed my hand, and I could feel her pulse. Fast, excited. "Ready?" she whispered. "Ready." In unison, we started the chant, our voices a soft murmur in the shadowy room. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. We stopped, holding our breath. The air felt heavier, like the moment before a storm breaks. I could hear the distant hum of the city through the walls, and somewhere in the apartment a clock ticked methodically. We stared into the mirror, waiting for something, anything to happen. Seconds passed like hours. Elise's hand felt clammy in mine. I was about to laugh it off when I noticed something in the mirror. It was subtle at first, a slight warping of our reflections, as if the glass was a pool of water someone had disturbed with a finger. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a weird kind of exhilaration. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice a little more unsteady than I would have liked. Elise didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the mirror, unblinking. I squeezed her hand, but she didn't squeeze back. "Elise?" Still no response. I turned to look at her. She was motionless, her gaze locked on the glass. The playful, adventurous spark that had been in her eyes all evening was gone, replaced by a hollow stare. The room was silent now. The hum of the city life seemed to have retreated completely. Even the clock had stopped ticking. A cold draft whispered across my neck and I shuddered. This was getting too weird. It was just a dumb game, wasn't it? I reached for the light switch, fumbling for a moment before the bathroom was flooded with the harsh, fluorescent reality. Blinking against the brightness, I looked over at Elise. She was still staring at the mirror, her face pale, her lips slightly parted, as if frozen in the middle of a word. "Hey, joke's over," I said, a nervous laugh hiding the unease that was coiling in my gut. "You got me. Good one." But she didn't react. I waved a hand in front of her face, snapped my fingers, but nothing seemed to register. Then, without warning, Elise blinked. She turned to look at me. Confusion etched across her features. "Why are we in the dark?" she murmured, looking around as if she didn't recognize her own bathroom. I opened my mouth to explain, to ask her if she was okay, but the words got stuck in my throat. Over her shoulder, in the mirror, I saw it. A shadow. A figure that wasn't there when I looked directly. It was a trick of the light. It had to be. Elise followed my gaze and froze. The color drained from her face. "Did you see her?" she whispered. "See who?" My own voice was barely audible. "Bloody Mary," she said. Then everything went black. When I came to, the bathroom was empty except for me. The candles had burned down to stubs, and there was no sign of Elise. I stumbled out into the living room, calling her name, but the apartment was silent. Had she left? Why? None of it made any sense. I pulled out my phone to call her, but when I looked for her contact, I couldn't find it. I went on Tinder, but her profile was gone, like it never existed. Panic clawed at me as I tried to piece together the evening. The candles, the chant, Elise's trance-like state, the figure in the mirror, all of it felt like a bad dream. I ran out of the apartment, the eerie stillness of her place making my skin crawl. Once outside, I gulped the fresh air, trying to clear my head. I told myself it was just a game, a dumb superstition, but the fear that had settled in my stomach told me otherwise. And the worst part? I had this gnawing feeling that it wasn't over, that whatever had started in the bathroom was just the beginning. I walked away from Elise's apartment, with my head spinning. The night air was crisp, and each breath felt like it was trying to erase the clinging tension that had followed me out of her place. I'd never been superstitious, but something about the evening's turn of events had left me unsettled. It was early midnight, and the city was unnaturally quiet. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was watching me from the shadows. It was silly, right? All we did was play a game. Nothing more than a spooky story brought to life by dim lights and a couple of glasses of wine. Right? When I finally got home, my apartment felt different. The familiar comfort of my living room now seemed foreign. As if the events at Elise's place had followed me back home. I laughed to myself, a short, humorous sound, and flipped on every light as I made my way to the bedroom. I avoided looking at my own bathroom mirror as I passed by. I wasn't taking any chances. I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind replayed the night over and over. The way Elise's eyes had looked when she stared into the mirror, the strange shadow I thought I'd seen, and her sudden disappearance. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was all an elaborate prank. The next day, I couldn't shake the unease. I kept checking my phone for a message from Elise, but there was nothing. No texts, no calls, no Tinder messages. But her contact was back somehow, so I decided to send her a text, trying to sound casual. Hey, last night was wild. Everything okay? The message sent, but was never delivered. It just hung there in the digital void, marked by a single mocking checkmark. She was offline, or she'd blocked me. Neither option made me feel any better. At work, I couldn't concentrate. The screensaver on my computer became a blur as my thoughts drifted. I had to see Elise again to make sure she was real. That last night hadn't been some vivid hallucination. As soon as my shift ended, I headed straight back to her apartment. The same eerie quiet from the previous night greeted me as I approached her building. My heart raced with each step up the familiar stairs. When I reached her door, I knocked, but there was no answer. I knocked again, louder, my knuckles rapping insistently against the wood. Still nothing. On a whim, I tried the doorknob. It turned, and the door creaked open to reveal the darkened apartment. "Elise?" I called out, stepping inside. The silence that met me was absolute. No sign of life. No hint that just last night we'd been laughing and sharing stories here. I flicked on the lights, half expecting to see her pop out of a corner, laughing at the joke she'd pulled on me. But the apartment was empty. It didn't even look like the same place. The furniture was covered in sheets, and there was a thin layer of dust on every surface. It looked like no one had lived here for months. Confusion swirled into fear. What was happening? I stumbled backward, my mind racing. That's when the old man appeared. "Can I help you?" he asked, emerging from the shadows of a doorway. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. I'm looking for Elise. Does she live here?" The old man furrowed his brow. "Elise? No one by that name here. I've lived here alone for years." Years? That couldn't be. I'd just been in this apartment with her last night. I must have the wrong place," I muttered, though everything inside me screamed that something was very wrong. As I left, I turned for one last look. The old man was watching me, an inscrutable expression on his face, as if he knew something he wasn't telling me. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. My mind was a jumbled mess of thoughts and theories. Had Elise been a ghost all along? Was I losing my mind? Or was this some kind of a sick game someone was playing with me? The worst part was the mirrors. I couldn't look at them anymore. Every time I caught a glimpse of my reflection, I expected to see something else looking back at me. Or someone. My bathroom mirror became my enemy, a gateway to a memory I wished I could forget. Then, things started happening. Little things at first. A whisper here, a shadow there. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone softly calling my name. I was alone, but it felt like someone was watching me. Right behind me. All the time. Just out of sight. Days blended into nights, and sleep became a stranger to me. My life became a cycle of work and restless evenings, punctuated by moments when I felt eyes on me, saw flickers of movement in my peripheral vision, and heard my name whispered by a voice that was not there. Every mirror became a portal of paranoia. I covered them all, unable to face the glass that seemed to hold secrets too dark for the light. It was a Tuesday when I couldn't take it anymore. The lack of sleep was tearing at my sanity. I went into work with bags under my eyes and a head full of fog. My boss pulled me aside, concern creasing his usually stern face. "You all right?" he asked. His hand clapped on my shoulder. "You look like hell." I tried to laugh it off, but the sound that came out was more of a croak. "Just not sleeping great," I admitted, which was the truth, but not the whole truth. He nodded, his eyes still studying me. "Maybe take a couple of days off. Rest up a bit." I nodded gratefully. The prospect of not having to stare at the computer screen was a relief. I headed home with the intention of trying to sleep, but as soon as I entered my apartment, the familiar sense of dread settled over me. The covered mirrors seemed to loom in the corners of my vision, their draped forms like silent sentinels waiting for something. I couldn't stand to be inside, so I decided to go for a walk, to try and clear my head. The city was different in the daylight, less menacing. I walked without direction, my mind racing in circles, replaying that night over and over. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe my mind conjuring up faces from the crowd. But there she was, Elise, walking towards me. She looked the same, yet there was something off about her. Her eyes didn't have the same warmth, and her smile seemed hollow. "Elise?" I called out, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk. She paused, her head tilting to the side as if she was trying to place me. "Do I know you?" she asked, her voice devoid of any recognition. "It's me, But how did you explain to someone that you had spent an evening playing Bloody Mary in the bathroom? She brushed past me, and that's when I noticed it. Her reflection in the store window we passed. It was warped, twisted, and it flickered like a flame being snuffed out. I stood there on the sidewalk, people moving around me like water around a stone. What was happening? Was I the one who was haunted, or was it her? The following night, I sat in my living room, staring at the sheet-draped mirror. I had to get to the bottom of this. I had to know what was real. With a shaking hand, I reached out and pulled the sheet off. My reflection stared back at me, tired, haggard, but alone. No shadows, no whispers, just me. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was all in my head. It had to be. But then, the air turned cold. A fog started to form in the mirror, and words appeared, scrawled as if by an unseen hand. You called me. My heart stopped. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, as if compelled by a force outside myself, I whispered, "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary." Nothing happened at first. Then the temperature dropped further, and I could see my own breath. The room darkened, and the edges of the mirror blurred. In the glass, my reflection began to change. It wasn't me anymore. It was her, Elise. But her eyes were wrong. They were dark pits, and her skin was pale, almost translucent. She reached out, her hand pressing against the glass, and I backed away, tripping over my own feet. The mirror Elise smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You wanted to see me," she said, her voice a whisper that filled the room. "Now, here I am." I crawled backward, my back hitting the couch. She was in the mirror. She couldn't hurt me. That's what I told myself. The mirror Elise laughed, a sound that was like glass breaking. "You think this is just about mirrors?" she said, her tone mocking. "It's about doors, and you opened one." Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. In the darkness, I heard a sound, a soft sliding noise that filled the room. It was coming from the mirror, which glowed with a light that didn't exist in the room. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling over the screen, desperate for a light. The flashlight blinked on, and the room was bathed in a weak, trembling glow. The mirror was just a mirror again, but the cold lingered, a physical presence that seemed to suck the warmth from the air. I couldn't stay here, not with that thing, whatever it was, lurking in my home. I grabbed my jacket and my keys and fled the apartment, my heart pounding a staccato rhythm against my ribs. The streets were empty, the city holding its breath as I passed, a lone figure haunted by more than just shadows. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to move, to get away from the mirrors and the memories and Elise's hollow eyes. As I walked, my mind raced with impossible thoughts. Mirrors as doors, reflections as reality. It was the stuff of ghost stories and cheap horror flicks, not real life. And yet, I couldn't deny what I'd seen, what I'd felt. I ended up in a 24-hour diner, the fluorescent lights harsh against my strained eyes. The waitress gave me a sympathetic smile as she poured me coffee, the steam of which seemed to be the only warmth in my world right now. "I'll take the night shift over the day. Less people, more peace. You look like a night owl yourself," she said casually. I tried to return her smile, but it was a weak effort. "Yeah, something like that." As the hours ticked by, I sat there, nursing coffee and jumping at every shadow. When morning came, I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't run from my reflection forever. With the first rays of dawn, I made my way back to my apartment. The door seemed to groan in protest as I opened it, and I half expected the mirrors to be waiting for me, Elise's spectral form smirking from the other side. But it was just my living room, quiet and undisturbed. The mirror was as I left it, silent and still. The fear was still there, and there was also anger now. Anger at being scared in my own home, at being played by whatever malevolent force I had inadvertently invited into my life. I stood before the mirror, my reflection a tired echo of myself. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice sounding defeated. There was no answer, just the quiet hum of the city waking up outside my window. Days passed, and the strange occurrences became less frequent. I still felt watched, but the whispers had quieted. The shadows had retreated. I even started to sleep again, my dreams free of mirrors and ghostly faces. But the peace was an illusion, a brief respite from the storm. One evening, as I was finally drifting off to a pitiful sleep, my phone buzzed. A message received in the dead of night. I reached for it, the screen's glow harsh against the dark. It was a picture message from an unknown number. I tapped it, and my blood ran cold. It was a photo of me sleeping, taken from the foot of my bed. The room was dark, except for a figure standing over me. A figure with hollow eyes and a too wide smile. Elise. The message beneath the photo was just 3 words, but they were enough to send a shiver down my spine. "See you soon." My eyes snapped to the foot of my bed, to the mirror on the opposite wall. But there was only darkness, and the faint outline of my own figure reflected back at me. Or at least, that's what I hoped. My heart pounded against my chest like it was trying to break free. The message on my phone was like a cold hand sliding down my spine. Someone was in my room, had been there while I slept, watching, waiting. And that someone looked like Elise, but twisted and wrong. I leapt from my bed, the sheets tangling around my legs as I made a clumsy dash for the light switch. The room flooded with light, and I spun around, expecting to find her there. But there was nothing, just the regular mess of my life, clothes strewn across a chair, books piled high on my desk. No sign of an intruder, except for the photo on my phone. The evidence was clear and chilling. I checked the locks on my doors and windows, not sure what I'd do if I found them tampered with. They were secure, just as I left them. How then? How had someone gotten in? The question hung in the air, unanswered and heavy. I tried to convince myself that the photo was a prank, a sick joke. Maybe one of my friends had somehow gotten hold of an old key, snuck in to scare me. but that didn't explain the figure in the photo. The too familiar face of Elise, when I knew she was miles away. Sleep was out of the question now. Every shadow seemed to move, every creak of the building's old bones sounded like footsteps. I sat in the corner of my room, my back to the wall, the phone clutched tightly in my hand as if it was a lifeline. As dawn approached, the fear that had gripped me so tightly began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and a sharp edge of anger. This had to end. I couldn't live like this, jumping at shadows, afraid of my own reflection. I had to confront this head-on. In a desperate attempt, I tried to reach out to Elise once again. My hands were steady as I typed out the message to her, asking if we could meet. I needed answers. Suddenly, the reply came quickly. Too quickly. Sure, it read. Coffee? Noon? I agreed and spent the morning pacing my apartment. When it was time to leave, I took one last look at the covered mirror in my living room, a shiver running through me, despite my resolve. The coffee shop was busy, a bubble of noise and activity. Elise was already there, sitting at a corner table, her face buried in a book. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment, she was just Elise, the girl I knew, not the ghostly figure from my nightmares. "Hey," she said, her smile cautious. "Hi." I sat down. The words I had planned to say suddenly lodged in my throat. We made small talk for a few minutes before I couldn't take it anymore. "Did you send me a photo last night?" Her brows furrowed. "What? No. Why would I do that?" I showed her the picture on my phone. Her face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. "That's not me. I mean, it looks like me, but I didn't take this. I swear." I believed her. The fear in her eyes mirrored my own. We talked, really talked, for the first time since that night at her place. She confessed that strange things had been happening to her too. Objects moving, lights flickering, and the same sense of being watched I'd felt. "It's like we stirred something up that night," she said, a tremor in her voice. "Something bad. We were in this together, bound by an experience neither of us understood. But knowing I wasn't alone was a small comfort. We needed to find out what was happening and how to stop it. The plan was to go back to her apartment, to the place where it all started. Maybe we'd find something there, some clue as to what we'd awoken. The day was overcast, a thick layer of clouds turning the sky a dull grey as we walked to her place. The city felt oppressive, the tall buildings like silent judges watching our progress. Her apartment was as I remembered, neat and cozy. But now there was a tension in the air, an electric charge that made the hairs on my arms stand up. We went to the bathroom, the scene of our foolish game. The mirror looked ordinary, but as we stood in front of it, I felt the temperature drop, the now familiar sign that we weren't alone. "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary," Elise whispered, her voice barely audible. I turned to her, my heart in my throat. "What are you doing?" "We need answers," she said, her eyes locked on the mirror. "And this is the only way." The room felt even colder, a chill that seemed to creep into my bones, sapping the warmth of my body. We stood there, side by side, our reflections staring back at us from the glass that suddenly seemed more like a barrier to another world than a simple bathroom fixture. I wanted to protest, to tell Elise that this was crazy, that we were just inviting more trouble. But the look in her eyes stopped me. There was a determination there I hadn't seen before. She was right. We needed to face this head on. We needed answers. Okay, I agreed, my voice steadier than I felt. Let's do it together. We turned back to the mirror, and in unison we called out the name that had started it all. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. Nothing happened at first. The silence was deafening, the anticipation a tangible thing between us. Then, a flicker in the mirror caught our attention. A shadow passed behind our reflections, a dark blur that made my stomach drop. We didn't move. Our eyes were fixed on the glass as the bathroom light began to flicker. It was like the beginning of a nightmare, but we were awake. Terribly awake. Show yourself, Elise commanded, her voice a mix of fear and defiance. The light steadied, and then, in the mirror, we saw her. The woman from the legend. The stories, the twisted version of Elise. She was there, behind us. But when I turned to look, the room was empty. She existed only in the reflection. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure in the mirror tilted its head, considering us, a slow, malicious smile spreading across her face. "You called me," she said. Her voice a distorted echo of Elise's. "Again and again you called me." "We didn't mean to. We didn't know," Elise said. "But now you do," the figure replied, her eyes burning with a dark light. "And you are mine." I could feel the panic rising, a scream building in my throat. This couldn't be happening. It was impossible. A nightmare that we couldn't wake up from. "What do you want?" I managed to say. The figure in the mirror reached out, her hand pressing against the glass. And as she did, the surface rippled like water. "I want to live," she said, and her hand broke through the mirror, grasping the air. We stumbled backwards, tripping over our own feet in our haste to get away. But as we moved, the room around us began to change. The walls, the doors, the very air turned into glass, reflecting us, reflecting her. There was no way out. Every direction we turned, we were faced with our own terrified reflections and the hungry gaze of Bloody Mary. I grabbed Elise's hand, searching for some comfort, some strength. We were in this together, but it was a small consolation now. "We won't let you have us," I said, though my voice shook with fear. But the figure in the mirror just laughed, a sound that chilled me to the core. "You already have," she said. And with that, the mirrors shattered, 1,000 pieces flying towards us as we raised our arms to shield ourselves. But there was no impact, no pain. Instead, the world went black. And when I opened my eyes, I was laying on the bathroom floor alone. Elise was gone. I called her name, but there was no answer, just the echo of my own voice. In a panic, I looked around, my eyes catching on the mirror. It was whole again, unbroken. But Elise's reflection was not there. I was alone. Truly alone. I searched the apartment, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, taken by the mirror, by Bloody Mary. I was left with nothing but questions and a haunting silence. I didn't understand what had happened, where Elise had gone, or how I was supposed to go on. I left the apartment, the weight of what had occurred bearing down on me, and everywhere I looked, in every window, every reflective surface, I saw her, Bloody Mary, watching me, a grim reminder of the price we had to pay for our curiosity. I had wanted answers, but now I just wanted to forget, to go back to before we had ever uttered that cursed name. But some things, once done, cannot be undone. I couldn't shake the image of Elise's face from my mind. The way she disappeared, as if swallowed by the mirror, left a void in my heart that mirrored the empty look in my own eyes whenever I dared glance at a reflective surface. I wanted to call her, to hear her voice and convince myself this was all just a bad dream. But I knew better. My phone was as silent as the grave, and Elise's number was just a haunting combination of digits that offered no answers. Days passed, and I became a shell of myself. My reflection haunted me, showing a man who was crumbling under the weight of guilt and fear. I avoided mirrors, puddles, anything that could cast my image back at me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the sensation of being watched. It was during one sleepless night that I decided I couldn't live like this. The apartment felt like a prison, and every corner whispered Elise's name. I packed a bag with a few clothes and left, hoping distance would dull the sharp edges of my memories. The drive was long and monotonous, a grey ribbon of road hemmed in by an ever-darkening sky. I drove without a destination, the hum of the tires on the asphalt a dull soundtrack to my fractured thoughts. When exhaustion finally overtook me, I found a run-down motel off a side road, its neon sign flickering like a beacon for lost souls. It was a place that promised anonymity and forgetfulness. The room I rented for the night was musty and dim, the kind of place where you could imagine drifters and runaways hiding from their pasts. I slept, but it wasn't restful. Dreams of Elise, of mirrors, and of that twisted, otherworldly version of her plagued me. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the darkness of the room a tangible presence. As dawn crept through the thin curtains, I made a decision. I couldn't run from this. I had to face it. If there was a way to bring Elise back, I had to find it. I couldn't let her be just another missing person, a cold case forgotten by a world that moved too fast. I went home. The trip back felt like a descent into madness. The closer I got to my apartment, the heavier the sense of dread became. It was evening when I arrived, the sky painted in shades of crimson and purple. The apartment was just as I left it, silent and still. I dropped my bag by the door and went straight into the bathroom. The mirror was there, innocuous and innocent, but I knew better. I could feel the charge in the air, the electric buzz that hinted at something more. "Elise?" I called out, my voice steady, but there was no reply. But I hadn't expected one. I reached into my bag and pulled out a hammer. With a deep breath, to steady my nerves, I approached the mirror. This was it. the point of no return. I raised the hammer and struck the glass. The mirror shattered with a sound like the world breaking, pieces cascading onto the sink and onto the floor. But as the shards settled, a deep silence filled the room. No apparition appeared. No dark laughter greeted me. Just silence. I searched through the fragments, my fingers trembling. What was I expecting to find? A portal to another world? Some sign of Elise? There was nothing. Just broken glass and a hollow feeling of defeat. I cleaned up the mess, the sharp edges of the mirror a stark reminder of the sharp edges of reality. It was over. I had destroyed the mirror, but I hadn't brought her back. I hadn't fixed anything. I sat on the bathroom floor amidst the dust and tiny fragments that I had missed. This was grief, raw and unyielding. The creeping realization that Elise was truly gone filled the room, suffocating in its intensity. I don't know how long I sat there before I noticed it. A piece of paper, folded neatly, laying just where the mirror had been. I reached for it, my hands shaking. Inside was a message, written in Elise's familiar handwriting. You can't bring back what's gone. Stop looking behind you. E. That was it. No explanation. No guide on what to do next. Just a simple message. It was both a comfort and a curse. It meant Elise was still out there somewhere. But it also meant she was beyond my reach. I had to move on, to live with the memory of her and the consequences of our actions. I kept that note, a bittersweet token of our friendship, and a warning for the future. Life went on, as it always does. I went back to work, met with friends, and found joy in small things, but I was forever changed. Every reflective surface carried a lesson, a reminder not to delve into things beyond our understanding. I avoided games of my childhood, the chants and challenges that once seemed innocent. Superstition had a new weight to it, a new meaning. I respected the boundaries between our world and whatever lay beyond. At night, when the world quieted down and I was left with my thoughts, I'd think about Elise. I wondered where she was, if she was at peace or trapped in a nightmare. The note suggested she had found some form of escape or existence beyond what we understood. But it provided no comfort, only questions that lingered with no answers. Sometimes, when I passed a mirror, I'd catch a glimpse of something, a flicker of movement that wasn't mine. I'd stop and look closer, my heart racing, half expecting to see Elise or the terrifying visage of Bloody Mary staring back at me. There was never anything there, just my own imaginations and the scars of my experiences playing tricks on me. Months turned into years, and the incident became a part of my past, a chilling story I'd share sometimes, watching the disbeliefs in people's eyes. I knew they thought it was just a story, an urban legend embellished for effect. I let them believe that because the truth was too difficult to bear, too impossible to understand. I moved to a new city, started over. The fresh start was good for me, but there was always a part of me that remained locked in that bathroom, with the echo of Elise's voice in the shattering mirror. One rainy evening, as I walked home from work, my reflection caught my eye in a store window. For a moment, I thought I saw Elise's reflection beside mine. I turned swiftly, but there was nothing there. Just a trick of the light and the rain-streaked glass. But then, a whisper carried on the wind, so faint I might have imagined it. "Don't look back." I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. It was Elise's voice. I was sure of it. But when I turned around, the street was empty. Just the glow of the street lights and the gentle patter of rain on the pavement. That night, I sat by the window, watching the reflections dance across the wet streets. The world was full of mirrors, some literal and some metaphorical, reflecting parts of our lives back at us. Maybe Elise was out there, a reflection caught in a world we couldn't see. Or perhaps she had moved on to something beyond. I didn't search for her again. The note was clear, and I respected her message. I lived my life looking forward, cherishing the memories but not letting them pull me back into the darkness. The mystery of Bloody Mary remained unsolved, a chilling folk tale that was all too real for me. And so, my story ends not with answers but with acceptance. Some things in life are beyond our understanding, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. We are left with the fragments of what was, the hope for what could be, and the silent reflections that accompany us throughout our lives.